I'll start by continuing the introduction and say, Veronica, thank you for all the work that you're doing. I think, as we think about how to spend the next 15, 20 minutes, from my perspective, it's the work about, I've been listening to a few of the speakers before, and it seems really clear that there's a great need in this world to get data on sustainability, circularity, regeneration, right? And that technical data provides definition. And that definition is what will allow humanity to collaboratively define the correct problems with the right priority to solve. And then I'll say there's a lot of people in this world that have opinions on what the problems are or what we should do to solve it. And Veronica, you're one of my favorite people in that what you're doing is you're not taking it for granted that people's opinions or different kinds of institutional sort of opinions are necessarily the correct ones. What you're doing is going and getting the actual technical data. You're doing the hard work of discovering that data, talking about it, putting into forms and summarizing it in ways that allow people to actually define the problems correctly. And that's so important because people with opinions about what sustainability, what circularity, whatever, I'll talk about Hig MSI in just a little bit, but people with certain opinions that want to hit the easy button that actually are not technically sound in what they're saying, it's counterproductive. It actually forces the wrong kind of investments. It forces the wrong kind of people spending their time solving technical things that are truly counterproductive to getting humanity to where we need to be. So anyway, Veronica, I'll start by saying thank you for your work and dedication. Clearly, the things that you've been writing about in the last couple of years that we've been talking about are so important towards providing that technical definition and understanding so that humanity can collaborate on the right problems to solve.
Well, yeah, thank you for the good review. And I would urge everyone to go and read The Great Greenwashing Machine Part 2, which just came out, so that you can see, if you're interested, what it is we're talking about here, what it is we're saying when we say that people are coming up with opinions and they're putting data out there and that they're encouraging consumers to behave in a certain way and brands to behave in a certain way. And it's not substantiated and it's counterproductive because sustainability is incredibly complex, and a lot of people seem to think it's very simple, and you just need to do you can just say, oh, organic's better or whatever's better, and that's all you need to worry about. But in fact, we have to remember that the fashion business is heavily dependent on the global south. Virtually all our fibers come from the global south. Most of the manufacturing is in the global south, and the number one priority in all of this is people. And when we talk about making doing something about climate change and something, yes, the real burden is on us because we are the people who have the big carbon footprints and the big water footprints. It's not the people producing in the global south. And we don't have the right to try to make these people lose their markets, whatever the case may be, simply so that we can tell ourselves that what we're buying is more sustainable and therefore we can keep buying it. And this is very problematic because, first of all, nobody has any studies. I mean, this is supposed to be a topic about data gaps, but I mean, you know this as well as I do, Luke. Actually, it's more like a data chasm. It's more like a data black hole. There is no data. When it comes to looking at the socioeconomic impact of the fibers, there's nothing at all. Everyone only looks at environmental impact. When they look at environmental impact, they are looking primarily at LCAs, but there is no suite of global LCAs produced using exactly the same standards and methodologies. And we have some really weird and wonderful results coming out of this. And these are described in greater detail in Great Greenwashing Machine Part 2. But I mean, for instance, plastics, which is obviously one of your favorite topics, Lou. Everyone is using the Plastics Europe study for PET. Well, Europe produces less than 3% of global polyester. And so to suggest, and furthermore, according to the UNFCCC report, that data is no longer even representative of European production, let alone global production, a lot of which we know now is coming from fracked gas. And you, again, Luke, you spent a lot of time pointing out how much methane is escaping that is not being captured properly, that's not being measured properly. And so people are taking this data and they're saying, oh, this is the impact, but it isn't. And they're going, we have reports coming out, whether it's, H&M saying, oh, we're going to double our production, we're going to halve our impact. And how are they measuring it? They're measuring it using existing indices, which are all based on out-of-date and non-comparable LCAs. And so the numbers that they're plugging in aren't the right numbers.
Exactly. Yeah, I think that's one of the things that, well, I think we've both found. There's someone else on the call. Are you hearing that too?
Yeah. Just carry on.
I'll talk over it. I think that, Veronica, one of the things that I found is, an LCA is a wonderful construct under certain conditions. So what an LCA is, in my opinion, it's a structure for it's a structured conversation. It's the predicate for a structured conversation. And then that structured conversation will only be as good as the assumptions and the data that you plug into it. And today there are a bunch of people that are publishing LCAs. And when you go to Gabby or you go to these databases where the primary data is supposed to be pulled from so that people can then report their way in which they're going to transmute that data into their impact story, what you find is the primary data is completely 100% absent of technical facts and scientific realities. When we talk about whether it's carbon footprints or water use, or I'll say right now, like we have this issue right now where you have people that are then using this data, which again, it's primary data that's not properly vetted, where there's not a lot of transparency on how the primary data for the LCAs is generated in the first place. And then people do their complicated work of setting up the LCAs and publishing a few. And then you have organizations like HIG MSI, so the HIG Material Sustainability Index, that then cherry pick and selectively pick some of those LCAs and not others. And then they don't tell you which data sets they're actually using. And then they perform normalization functions on that data to try to take apples and compare them not to oranges, but apples and compare them to rocks and dirt and trees and other things that just don't apply. And they don't tell you what the normalization is. And then they publish a set of information that is supposed to be normalized and is the easy button that many brands are now using to try to communicate to consumers what is the impact. And I find it very, very ironic that we call that transparency, because it's literally the opposite of transparency. Taking hidden data and using hidden algorithms to create new data that has you have no idea where it really comes from or where it ties to, unless you do the work that, Veronica, that you've been doing to try to suss out where is some of this data coming from. That is the opposite of transparency. And yet it's sold as a product of transparency to consumers. I find it inconceivable, really, that then the European Union would be using HIG as a metric to try to define out how policy ought to be decided. It's absolutely counterproductive towards scientific reality. And anyway,
I would also
that's
I think consumers have a right to expect that if they're going to be advised on something, and it's not just the HIG, they are all of them private databases. I mean, Gabby now belongs to BlackRock. Sustainability is big business. It is a huge business and it's a growing business. And I think voters have a right to know that when they're being told something is sustainable or not sustainable, that this has actually been approved, vetted, evaluated by independent bodies, by authorities. They have a right to be able to go and look at that data anytime they want to. Those producers, like at the moment, obviously, we're going to talk about Higg MSI because it's the only one you can actually access. I don't have access to Gabi. I don't have access to Echo Invent. I don't have access to WALDB. So we'll just use the Higg as the example, but they all have the same problem. If you go to the Higg index, you see that certain fibers are deemed to be very unsustainable. This is primarily silk, alpaca, all the farm fibers. If you are a producer and someone is saying that your fiber is unsustainable, you are going to lose sales. And we can, if we have time, we can look at some silk data and we can see how many sales they've lost. Now, surely you have a right to know on what basis you are being penalized. And you have a right to contest this score. And you have a right to have some independent body adjudicate who is right. That does not exist at the present time. We had the silk industry, the leather industry, and the alpaca industry all protesting their Higg scores at the end of 2020. And silk got so irritated at the SAC's refusal. And we say, well, I'm talking about the SAC, but obviously the SAC no longer owns the Higg MSI. The Higg MSI belongs to Higco, which is a private company, a for-profit registered in Delaware. But anyway, they were talking to the SEC. They were asking for clarification, for explanations, and they were asking the SEC to change the score, and the SEC refused. So the silk industry wrote to the Federal Trade Commission of the United States and filed a complaint with the Federal Trade Commission. And at the present time, I've seen the letter from June last year, I think it is, saying that the FTC has put the SEC on their list of companies of interest to global regulators and legislators. Now, this is then going to be sold to consumers as being transparent, unbiased, independent information. By definition, it isn't, and it's just wrong. It's ethically wrong. Yes, it's business. Businesses want to have a say. They want to have something to do with it. I understand all of that, but they cannot be judge and jury. And if we're going to have consumers being told that some things are more sustainable than other, this has to be coming from leading academics, from leading research institutions, and it has to be globally open. It has to be publicly available. It has to be supervised by some kind of public body. There has to be recourse. There has to be all of these things. Otherwise, it is unfair. And as we've already established by looking at this, it's actually wrong. The data is wrong. You can't look at like a little study of 100 silk farmers in 2006 in Tamil Nadu and say this represents global silk production in 2022, because it doesn't. And
I think the key is peer review. Like, in my training, when you get a PhD in chemistry, one of the fundamental things that you learn is that your work, before you can publish it, is going to be subjected to peer review. And then when you go off to be a chemistry professor, it's more of the same. And I think the key thing here is that we presently have a system where, there's a lot of course, economic interest in being able to teach consumers. If you're a brand, you want to spend the least amount of money possible to tell the maximum story that you can to sell your product. And then what you end up having in this world is every brand is out there shining their light on, how they define the goodness of what they do and what they deliver. And you end up with everybody is shining an ever brighter light. And at this point, humanity is blinded by a lack of, it's just an overwhelming amount of noise of everybody's sustainability or circularity or regenerative story. And what we need is peer review where and it's kind of interesting too for me to think about, like, we also live in a very unique part of history where there are billionaires who have the money and the capacity. It doesn't take that much money. I've done some back of the envelope calculations on this. It doesn't take that much money to build a system for peer review that can be the new, Library of Alexandria, whatever. It can be the new library on the internet so that people can open source, bring in their information. There needs to be scientists and technical people to be able to peer review it. I know lots of people, by the way, and I'm sure, Veronica, you and I would gladly raise our hands in different capacities to be, some of the people that help try to peer review and help try to, review the data, review the studies, review, and then put that data into a framework that's searchable, that can be updated, and where voids in the information can be identified so that other people, then grants written to go get teams of PhD candidates and postdoctoral scholars and professors and, I don't know, people in industry too, right? We need all angles and perspectives to go search out, gather that data, put it into structured forms in ways where the end goal is not to make it easy or just purely to make money. It's literally to define the problems the right way. And again, it doesn't take that much money. We don't need a bunch of competing privatized companies competing around this information and keeping hidden information, paid subscription only ways to get this information. It needs to be open source. So I don't know, anyone in the audience that's considering. So, I could whine, I could complain, I could whatever, a bunch more until everyone's bored out of their minds. But I'll say, I think the real solution here, maybe here's a simple analogy that comes to mind. Imagine that you just came onto a car crash and you see mangled vehicles in the middle of an intersection. And you think about, what do I do here? So, you check on the occupants of the car and you find that the occupants are kind of okay, but their cars are just, utterly destroyed. And if you think that the answer to the solution or the answer to the problem is to pull the sheet metal out on the car and then send them on their way, well, you probably aren't dealing with the fact that the radiators are busted, the crankshafts, the whole cars are mangled. But then if you don't step back even further, you'll find that, there's this problem. It's that all of the lights on the stoplight above the intersection are green, causing people to smash into each other in a never-ending cascade of car crashes because there's actually not any technical rigor to direct the traffic. And that's the world that we find ourselves in right now. We literally have privatized the traffic lights, and everyone wants their traffic light to be green, and it literally sends resources cascading and crashing into each other. The only way to fix that I know of is to actually figure out how to time the traffic lights and have the contrast of some people need to stop and other people need to go.
Well, I think we're almost out of time here. So, yeah, I think what we're asking, basically, I think you need legislation to begin with. Somebody has to come in here and say, guys, you cannot keep doing what you like. And the industry cannot be both, judge, jury, scorekeeper, all the things it wants to be. It's a very rich industry. As you say, these things don't cost huge amounts of money. But somebody needs to step back and say, enough of business as usual. We want real change, and we're not going to get real change with the system we've got at the moment. And we need to build a new system. We need a better system. All the stakeholders have to come to the table, and they have to, as you say, kind of agree on a framework of what kind of boundaries, what kind of methodologies we're going to use for these studies, who's going to go around and get them, who's going to provide them, where they're going to go. All of your idea of having this site, this open site where we could go and see it. So I think that's basically what we have to say for the minute.
And I'll say you can find Veronica and I on LinkedIn and other places, and we'd love to engage anyone who's out in the audience who's like-minded, who thinks that, defining the right problems to solve and the right way to get the information and the way to open source peer review. If you agree that that's an important thing to help, forwarding humanity so people in the biosphere can work together and peacefully coexist, then please reach out. Love to work with you.